In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Dear audience, I am going to talk about psychoanalytical criticism today. We have already talked about neo-criticism, structuralism, post-structuralism, liberal humanism, and feminism. Now it is time that we should be talking about psychoanalysis literary theory. You must have read the name of Freud, Sigmund Freud. He was basically a doctor. He was looking at examining, investigating the psychological issues of the psychological problems. So he had a number of patients. When they came to him, they talked about their psychological issues. They talked about some of the time the sexual content. And Freud, he also observed some of the children, and then on the basis of his experiences he developed his theory of psychoanalysis. Later on I will be talking about that how his ideas and some of the ideas of Lacan, they can be applied to literature. So as I have said that he was a doctor, he was examining the psychological issues of the patients. So he devised his theory saying that there are three parts of the mind. So one is the conscious part of the mind, the other is pre-conscious or conscience, and the third is the unconscious part of the mind. Basically, he is interested in the unconscious part of the mind and he calls it id, and he also relates it with the pleasure principle. So he thinks that the unconscious part of the mind, it does not have access. So our conscious mind, it cannot directly relate with the unconscious part of the mind. And our conscious mind, he calls it ego part of the mind, and our conscience, zamir, that is the super ego part of the mind. So super ego, it is related with the society. So in society we have got traditions and culture, okay, likes and dislikes, okay, values. So then human beings, they learn that what they can do in the society and what they cannot do in the society. So our unconscious mind, that is the id, which is also the pleasure principle, which wants to achieve or attain pleasure in whatever we are doing, it is usually suppressed, it is usually repressed by the conscious mind, ego part of the mind. So ego or super ego, because they are related with the culture, they are related with the society, and society talks about that what we can do or what we cannot do. So it suppresses the unconscious part of the mind, which is the pleasure principle. So in pleasure principle, we have got our sexual desires, our wants. So human beings, they want to achieve pleasure in whatever they are doing. But the ego or the super ego, it shows resistance to the pleasure principle, and it converts, and in this way it converts our sexual pleasures into some other kind of energies. For example, you are doing a degree in BS, or you are supposed to write an article, or later on you are supposed to write a thesis. So this is how your energies, they are converted into something which is useful for you or for the society, and your pleasure principle, it is suppressed. But all the time it cannot be suppressed, of course, because they are there in our unconscious part of the mind. So they are there. So what happens is that according to Freud, we can reach this part, the unconscious part, the pleasure part, the id part in our dreams. So when human beings, they are sleeping and the conscious part is sleeping, the unconscious part, okay, it becomes active. So Freud talks about three, ways which can help us to reach our unconscious part of the mind. So first of all, it is through dreams. Second of all, it is through, parapraxis or slips of the tongue. And third is the jokes. So what we are supposed to do is that we are supposed to analyze these parts, and in this way we can find the unconscious part of the mind. So usually in our dreams we have, the pleasure principle, it is working, and sexual desires, they are fulfilled in the dream. Fears are there, okay, something which is very erratic, it is there, okay, and you may find something in the dream which can be frightening to you, which can be something very odd and strange, and something, which can give you the pleasure. So through our dreams or through the analysis of the dreams, we can reach the unconscious part of the mind. Then he says that the male child basically is attracted towards the mother. And you must have read one of the dramas, classical drama written by Sophocles, Oedipus Rex. So in Oedipus Rex, the main character of the drama, he kills his father and marries his mother. So from there, Freud brings in the ideas and he divides the child's, early stages into three stages. So he calls them that there is the mouth stage, where the child is getting pleasure through the mouth. It is one of the erotogenic, things. Then the second one is the anal, and third one is the phallic stage. So in mouth, when the child is weeping and it gets, breast, or it gets nipple, or it gets something which can satisfy his needs, so the child becomes one with mother in this stage. It is very difficult for the child to differentiate between himself and the mother, and the child gets the pleasure. And when the mother is giving the bathroom training to the child, so the child gets the anal as well as the phallic pleasure from the mother. And this is how he theorizes the concept of, Oedipus Rex, that the child wants to become one with the mother later on as well. But then the name of the father, the rule of the father, it comes into the play. And the child comes to know that there is a rival, there is a father who can castrate him. And in this way, the child cannot become one with the mother. So he keeps on, changing these stages, and he keeps on presenting different kinds of models. And Charles Bressler talks about different kinds of models as well. For example, the model of human psyche, the dynamic model. Okay, so in dynamic model, he talks about the conscious, the rational part of the mind, the unconscious, the irrational part of the mind. Okay, and then he also talks about, the some other models as well, like economic model and typographical model, and where he talks about different stages, because he is trying to understand from what age till what age the child is going through that particular stage. But as I have told you that he talks about there is ego, there is superego, and there is id. Id is the pleasure principle, and ego or superego, they are the repressing principles. They repress the energy of the child the pleasure principle and converts that energy into some of the other good kind of things that you can do in the society. And then we have got Lacan. Before I talk about Lacan, Lacan is a post-structural theorist, and Freud is a liberal humanist. In liberal humanism, we have talked about the idea of self. Freud also talks about the idea of self, and he says that the pleasure principle and the other ego and superego, they help control the pleasure principle. The self, it can attain its fullness, it can attain free will. But Lacan, who is a post-structuralist, he believes that the unconscious is equated with the language. So as language is quite complex, so the unconscious is also quite complex. So just like unconscious, which is very complex, and it is just like the language, so he also divides, Lacan also divides things into different kinds of three stages. So here we have got mirror stage, we have got a real stage, and we have got the symbolic stage. Symbolic stage is the stage where the child acquires the language, he learns the language, he is totally aware of the language, he can differentiate between the self and the other, he knows that he is not one with the mother, he knows that mother is something different, so that is the other. So this is how Lacan also develops his theory of psychoanalysis. So let me read some of the paragraphs related to Lacan. Lacan developed his own version of psychoanalysis based on the ideas articulated in structuralist linguistics and anthropology in the 1950s. You might think of Lacan as Freud plus Saussure with a dash of Levi Strauss and even more reasoning of Derrida. But his main influence or precursor is Freud. Lacan reinterprets Freud in light of structuralist and post-structuralist theories, turning psychoanalysis from an essentially humanist philosophy, because Freud was a humanist, as I have just told you, into a post-structuralist one. One of the basic premises of humanism, as we have already discussed, is the idea of free will or self-determination. So humanism believes in that human beings are free, they can have their own free will, and they can determine that what they can do or what they cannot do. They are free. Freud's notion of the unconscious was one of the ideas that began to question or to destabilize that humanist ideal of the self. He was one of the precursors of post-structuralism in that regard. But Freud hoped that by bringing the contents of the unconscious into the consciousness, he could minimize repression and neurosis. So bringing the ideas, the contents of the unconscious into the consciousness, Freud wanted that in this way, the stable self, it can be determined. Human being, they can become stable, and stable self can be determined. He makes a famous declaration about the relation between the unconscious and the conscious, saying that where it was, shall I be. In other words, the it or the id, unconscious, will be replaced by the I, by consciousness and self-identity. For Lacan, this project is impossible. Lacan thinks that the stable self, it cannot be determined because post-structuralism does not believe in it. The ego can never take the place of the unconscious or empty it out or control it, because for Lacan, the ego or I self is only an illusion, a product of the unconscious self. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, the unconscious is the ground of all being, where Freud is interested in investigating how the polymorphously perverse bad child forms an unconscious, and a superego becomes a civilized and productive adult. Lacan is interested in how the infant gets this illusion we call a self. Central to the conception of the human in Lacan is the notion of the unconscious, which governs all factors of human existence, is structured like a language. So unconscious is structured like a language. He bases this on Freud's account of the two main mechanisms of unconscious processes, condensation and displacement. Now we should remember, because Lacan brings language into it, and how we can carry out the psychoanalysis. It is through the textual analysis that we can carry out the psychoanalysis study of the text. So it is the condensation. So condensation, we are condensing one idea, source, into the target. That is metaphor, through metaphor. Anger is just like a hot container. So anger, here hot container is the source, anger is the target. So this is how the, anger, it is contained in hot container. So this is how metaphor is used. So through metaphors and through displacement, metonymy, that 100 sails I saw in the river. So 100 sails, whole part relationship. It is determining, the whole. It means 100 ships. So what you are supposed to do is that you are supposed to understand the text, that how it is produced, how metaphors are used, how, metonymies are used, how symbols are used in the text, and what they stand for, what they mean. For example, in the lighthouse, you may come across minarets, you may come across tall buildings. So we will find that they are related to the male sex organs. So this is how symbolically texts, they talk about the psyche of the author, they talk about the psyche of the characters. So when you are reading the text psychologically, you should look for the symbols, you should look for the metonymies, you should look for the metaphors. So there are certain questions and certain things that you should keep in your mind when you are carrying out the psychoanalysis. For example, there are certain assumptions. The tripart nature of the manifest self, whether it is the self of the author, the fictitious character, or the collective consciousness behind the work. The work of art as a dream work that reflects the suppressed content of the id of either of the author or of his characters. So this is how on Doll's House, people have applied psychoanalysis. On Hamlet, people have applied psychoanalysis. On Macbeth, people have applied psychoanalysis. So you should read against the grain. You should pay attention to the text. You should pay attention to the words on the page and try to understand the psyche of the author, the psyche of the characters. And if there are certain dreams over there, analyze those dreams and see that how metaphors and similes and things, they have been condensed into the language, how metonymies have been used, how symbols have been used. In the end, I would like to summarize. Today we have talked about psychoanalysis. We have read some of the ideas of Freud. Freud talks about pleasure principle. Freud talks about id, that is the unconscious part of the mind. And he says that directly we cannot reach the unconscious part of the mind. So it is only in sleep, when we are having a dream, we can, travel, we can find, we can investigate the unconscious part of the mind. And Lacan says that this unconscious part of the mind is equated with language. And through symbols, metaphors, and metonymies, we can reach that unconscious part of the mind. So this is how you will carry out the psychoanalysis of the literary text. Thank you very much.